Intimidation, it becomes a mind game where you have to rely on your own ability and conditioning, and that's what's important. As long as I'm in condition, and the rest is just competition, and just compete.
This is Hakeem Olajuwon, a transcendent big man who revolutionized basketball with his agility, footwork, and unmatched presence under the rim. Two-time NBA champion, two-time Defensive Player of the Year, and the first ever foreign-born player to win MVP, Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon is widely regarded as the most skilled center to ever play the game. But despite his immense talent and grace on the court, Hakeem always valued competition, the players who challenged him and sometimes even infuriated him. So let's dive into the players Hakeem admits to hating the most during his legendary run in basketball, and the last one will leave you speechless. Maurice Lucas, the ultimate enforcer. Known across the league as the enforcer, Lucas wasn't the kind of player who made headlines for flashy dunks or buzzer-beater shots. His game was built on relentless physicality and a determination to make his opponents uncomfortable. And for Hakeem, few players embodied frustration and grit more than Maurice. Their battles felt less like basketball games and more like wars fought in the trenches. Maurice entered the NBA in 1974 after a stellar collegiate career at Marquette University. His reputation as a dominant force preceded him. Many players knew what they were getting into when they faced him, a bruising, unapologetic competitor who wasn't afraid to throw elbows, initiate contact, or impose his will on the court. And going toe-to-toe with Maurice meant adapting to a raw, almost primal level of physical basketball. Maurice thrived on making everything difficult for his opponents, whether it was defending the post, boxing out for rebounds, or engaging in mental warfare. He was the kind of player you couldn't ignore. When you played Maurice, you didn't just play basketball, you fought for survival. He tested you in every way, physically and mentally. Hakeem once recalled in an interview, one particular encounter occurred during the 1987 NBA playoffs, a time when the stakes couldn't have been higher and tensions were already boiling over. That night, Maurice wasn't even targeting Hakeem initially. His sights were set on Hakeem's teammate and partner in crime, Ralph Sampson. During one heated possession, Sampson and Maurice clashed in the paint, shoving each other fiercely as the referees rushed to blow the whistle and stop the action. Both players continued jawing and pushing each other, refusing to back down. Hakeem, always the teammate ready to back up his guys, stepped in to pull Maurice away. It was meant to be a peacekeeping gesture, but Maurice wasn't having any of it. Instead, he turned around and shoved Hakeem hard, sending him backward while screaming in his face. Hakeem's composure evaporated in an instant. He charged back, aiming to retaliate, but was restrained before anything major could happen. Even as other Rockets players and coaches worked to defuse the growing chaos, Maurice and Hakeem managed to meet up again a few feet away from the pile. There they were, face to face, trading shoves and escalating their trash talking. Maurice, notorious for getting under his opponent's skin, kept shouting at Hakeem, daring him to step further. And Hakeem yelled right back, visibly furious yet trying to break free from the restraint of his teammates and coaches. Meanwhile, Sampson? He had casually stepped away from the pile mid-fight, almost as if relaxing and spectating the chaos he'd played a hand in starting. The visual of Sampson, standing off to the side, remains one of the absurd elements of the scuffle. A full-on battle between Hakeem and Maurice, playing out behind him as he casually disengages. That night represented everything Hakeem had come to know about battling Maurice Lucas. It wasn't just basketball. It was a psychological and physical grind, designed to force players out of their comfort zone. For Maurice, every shove, every elbow, every glare was part of a larger strategy to disrupt not just the Rockets, but Hakeem himself. You couldn't outskill him, Olajuwon said, because he was relentless and wouldn't let up for a second. While Maurice wasn't a stat sheet darling, rarely leading in scoring or assists, his presence was inescapable. He made his impact through grit, crashing the boards with intensity and setting bruising screens that left opponents rattled. His defense often bordered on confrontational, and his rebounding was all about winning positioning through brute strength. Hakeem learned to adjust, using his agility and footwork to minimize the effects of Maurice's rough style. But even then, it wasn't easy. He had a way of targeting players he believed were at the top, those who would present a real challenge to his physical dominance. and Hakeem, the rising star in Houston, wasn't going to let anyone impose their will on him without a fight. Through those battles, Hakeem built not just resilience, but an appreciation for the rawness Maurice brought to the game. Years later, Hakeem reflected on his unique ability to frustrate him. Maurice was the kind of player who wanted your respect, but on his terms. He wasn't going to wow you with finesse. That's not who he was. What he gave you was determination, and if you didn't match it, he'd bury you. Their battles became legendary inside the league. Even players on other teams took note of how their games were hard to predict. Maurice didn't care whose spotlight he was stepping into. For him, every game was a chance to prove that toughness was never about stats, but it was about mindset and will. And the numbers didn't always tell the story of Lucas's impact on Olajuwon's game. Statistically, he might have looked like just another role player, but Hakeem knew the truth. He made him work harder than most players he'd ever faced, and those heated encounters left lasting memories, not just for him, but for everyone watching. The lessons learned from those battles lasted a lifetime, helping Hakeem refine his approach to the game and ultimately cement his legacy as one of the sport's all-time greats. When asked later in his career about the players he despised facing the most, Hakeem didn't hesitate to mention Maurice. He wasn't the most famous opponent I had, but he was one of the most difficult. He knew how to frustrate the best players, and that made him unique. I hated playing against him then, but I respect him now. Maurice was there to leave an impact on the game, and on Hakeem, he did just that. The next player meant disrespect when trash-talking and got punched right in the face, even though Hakeem considered him a tough guy. Billy Paltz, the crafty veteran. Hakeem's rookie season in 1984 was a whirlwind, filled with highs, lows, and unexpected encounters. Encounters that shaped him into the generational talent we celebrate today. One of the earliest and most surprising challenges he faced came from Billy Paltz, a seasoned veteran whose cleverness and unique approach made him one of the most frustrating opponents Hakeem would ever face. He wasn't your typical NBA big man, and that's exactly what made him so dangerous. Standing at 6'11" with a wiry frame, Billy earned the nickname the Whopper. It was never just his size that stood out, but his startling knack for outsmarting younger, more athletic opponents with nothing but his basketball IQ and old-school craftiness. He didn't rely on sheer athleticism or dominant physicality like many centers of his era. Instead, Billy thrived on strategy, timing, and exploiting the smallest weaknesses he could find in his defender. Even before Hakeem entered the league, Billy was already regarded as a tough puzzle to solve for opponents. Drafted in 1970 by the San Diego Rockets before moving to the ABA and earning all-star recognition, Billy spent years mastering the art of frustrating rival players. By the time the Rockets drafted Hakeem in 1984, Billy was in the twilight of his career, serving as a backup center for the Utah Jazz. But don't let the backup label fool you. He didn't need to be a high-minute player to make an impact. His presence in games was felt every time he stepped on the court. For Hakeem, life as a rookie was already a massive adjustment. The pace of the NBA was faster than anything he had experienced in college at the University of Houston, and every night brought him face-to-face with a new level of physicality. But nothing prepared him for the mental games that Billy would play. The first time Hakeem matched up against him, it was clear he wasn't dealing with an ordinary post player. Billy had moves that half of the league couldn't even defend, and he knew how to exploit weaknesses, Hakeem later remarked in an interview. Those weaknesses weren't glaring. They could be something as simple as a brief hesitation, a moment of indecision, or a rookie mistake born out of inexperience. Whatever it was, Billy pounced on it. And what set him apart was the ability to dictate the pace of the game, a skill that baffled Hakeem early in his career. Billy used pump fakes, spin moves, and crafty positioning to draw fouls on opponents, including Hakeem, who often found himself chasing Billy's movements rather than initiating his reactions. For someone like Hakeem, blessed with rare athletic ability and instinctive shot-blocking prowess, this approach from Billy was frustrating in ways that physical battles never were. Instead of playing to his explosiveness, it became a game of chess between the two. And in Hakeem's rookie year, the experienced Billy often came out ahead. He played a style of basketball that wasn't easy to counter, Hakeem recalled years later. Those early matchups forced Hakeem to think differently, to recognize that raw talent wasn't always enough, and that navigating the psychological aspect of the game was just as important. While their battles on the court were always competitive, one particular incident in Hakeem's rookie season took the rivalry to an entirely unexpected level. On April 20th, 1985, during Game 5 of the Rockets' first-round series against the Utah Jazz, tension between Hakeem and Billy boiled over in dramatic fashion. The play unfolded in a normal moment. Hakeem and Billy were stationed in the paint, waiting for an upcoming possession. But what happened next stunned everyone watching. For reasons still unknown, whether it was the buildup of trash talk or lingering frustration, Hakeem cocked his arm back and slapped Billy squarely in the face. The slap came out of nowhere, and the impact sent Billy stumbling backward in shock. Hakeem carried on as if nothing had happened, and the surprisingly subdued Billy refrained from retaliating. The incident remains one of the biggest question marks in Hakeem's career. Speculation over the years suggested that Billy might have been subtly trash-talking Hakeem during their battles, pushing him to the brink of anger with passive-aggressive remarks. But if there was a history of bad blood between the two, it wasn't obvious before that slap. Whatever the reason, the fight demonstrated the psychological edge Billy often carried into his matchups. The slap wasn't just random. It was the result of the mental chess that he had played against Hakeem for months, slowly finding ways to get under the young star's skin. If one moment proved just how disruptive Billy could be, this was it. And as shocking as the incident was, it marked a turning point in Hakeem's growth. Facing players like Billy taught him that dominating the NBA required not only skill and athleticism, but patience and restraint. His ability to handle provocation, whether mental or physical, would strengthen as his career progressed. Hakeem adapted, started using crafty counters of his own to duel players like Billy. He became more disciplined and less reactive, allowing his footwork and instincts to take over when opponents sought to frustrate him. The next time he faced players who relied on mind games, Hakeem was ready for them. Although Billy never dominated the league, his impact on Hakeem's development was undeniable. The infuriating games in the post, whether they resulted in fouls, turnovers, or even fights, forced Hakeem to evolve into the patient and unstoppable force we know today. And by the mid-1980s, Billy's career was winding down. He retired in 1985 and left behind a legacy as one of the craftiest big men of his time. While he didn't achieve the levels of stardom reserved for players like Hakeem, his style and resilient impact were unforgettable for opponents who had to deal with him firsthand. And for Hakeem, he was one of those players, frustrating and always challenging for a young rookie finding his way. Now, we move on to one of his most memorable fights on the court, and which could be the reason why he hated this player, Antonio McDyess, the hyper-athletic Gnat. He was an athletic nightmare, a relentless force who matched power with speed. He entered a league packed with towering giants like Shaq, David Robinson, and, of course, Hakeem Olajuwon. When McDyess first stepped onto an NBA court, his versatility was what made him stand out. He wasn't just another big man operating in the paint. He could stretch the floor with his jumper, fly in transition, and battle on the boards with ferocity. This caught Hakeem's attention immediately. For Hakeem, it wasn't Antonio's stats that got under his skin. It was his relentless energy. Hakeem later explained the difficulty of defending McDyess. You couldn't slow him down. He was everywhere, and he didn't stop coming. By the late 90s, Antonio had matured into one of the league's most athletic and hard-to-contain forwards. Facing Hakeem in one-on-one matchups, Antonio had the rare ability to force him out of his comfort zone. Where most centers tried and failed to match Hakeem's graceful moves in the post, McDyess approached the game differently. His high motor and ability to cover ground quickly created chaos. Hakeem often had to adjust his game plan during matchups because McDyess could guard him one play, then outrun his teammates in transition on the next. One game in particular stands out, a physical clash late in the fourth quarter of a regular season meeting between the Houston Rockets and the Phoenix Suns during Antonio's stint in Phoenix. The Rockets held a sizable lead over the Suns, but the tension between Hakeem and McDyess bubbled over during a critical possession. They began elbowing and jostling for position on the floor, both refusing to back down. What started as typical basketball physicality quickly escalated. As the play progressed, McDyess and Hakeem began slapping each other's arms down, fighting for positioning under the rim. Then came the breaking point. He shoved Hakeem backward in a moment of frustration. Hakeem, famously composed throughout his career, retaliated with a shove of his own, followed by a punch. McDyess answered with a haymaker, and the two were suddenly locked in an all-out brawl. In just a matter of seconds, they traded 3 punches each, some landing before referees, teammates, and other staff rushed in to break them apart. While Hakeem had never been one to lose his cool, this moment felt like an anomaly. Watching one of the league's most composed stars throw punches showed just how much McDyess had pushed his limits. What happened afterward, though, might have been even more surprising. As the referees separated the two, Hakeem stood calmly, almost in disbelief that a foul was being called against him for the altercation. It was as if he had forgotten the chaos that had just unfolded seconds earlier. Meanwhile, McDyess seemed equally unfazed, looking more annoyed than regretful as the officials assessed penalties for both players. This chapter was a defining moment in their rivalry. It wasn't just a fight on the court, but an emblematic of Antonio's ability to frustrate even the most composed players with his relentless physicality and energy. The rivalry wasn't just about that incident, though. It was about McDyess consistently forcing Hakeem to step up in every matchup. While his skill usually outshone McDyess, it wasn't always easy for the Dream to dominate the younger star. Antonio's mid-range jumper was a major thorn in Hakeem's side. As someone who primarily guarded in the post, Hakeem had to extend his defense further out than usual, creating additional challenges. If he left his feet on a jumper, McDyess was quick enough to use his athleticism to drive past him, and if he stayed grounded, McDyess could knock down the shot with ease. Still, Hakeem ultimately respected McDyess' competitor. The battles were tough, physical, and sometimes hating, but Hakeem believed Antonio helped him grow as a player, forcing him to adjust not just his tactics, but also his mindset. McDyess represented the new era of forward-center hybrids, athletes who combined size with unprecedented speed and agility. Unfortunately, his injuries eventually slowed down his career before he could reach the heights many predicted. After tearing his patellar tendon at the peak of his powers, he was never quite the same. While his post-injury career was still solid, it lacked the explosiveness that had defined his early years. Hakeem once commented on Antonio's decline, saying, "He was a nightmare to deal with back then. When the injuries hit him, you felt for him, but you appreciate what a competitor he was." Despite their battles, it's clear that McDyess was a symbol of the type of competitor who refused to back down, even when facing a legend. Their clashes on the court remind us that greatness isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about embracing them, even when they come in the form of a younger rival who plays the game at a lightning pace. Anthony Mason, the Intimidator. Few players in NBA history matched Anthony's unique mix of defensive intimidation and psychological warfare. Standing tall at 6'7", with a powerful physique and a confrontational attitude that felt larger than life, Anthony was the player who made everyone uncomfortable, including the unstoppable Hakeem. Known for his fierce demeanor, Anthony turned every matchup into a fight for survival, using physicality as his weapon and mind games as his ammunition. For Hakeem, facing Anthony was about enduring a physical battle that drained him every time they met. And to understand how Anthony became this unyielding force and one of the rivals Hakeem remembers hating the most, you have to look at his origins. Anthony didn't walk into the league as a polished talent or a superstar in the making. He was a scrapper from the start. Drafted in the 3rd round in 1988 by the Portland Trail Blazers, he didn't settle in right away. His NBA career started as an uphill climb, bouncing around different teams and even overseas leagues before finally landing in New York in 1991. That was where Anthony's career truly started to flourish, behind the resilience, grit, and the indomitable toughness that became his trademark. By the time Anthony joined Pat Riley's Knicks, he had carved out a reputation as one of the most physically punishing defenders in the league. Riley famously emphasized gritty defensive basketball, and Anthony became the team's enforcer on the court. But he was never just physical, but he was also unpredictable. His defensive versatility allowed him to switch between guarding forwards and centers, using his strength to body up against the league's biggest stars. And for Hakeem, one of the game's most skilled big men, playing against Anthony meant constant adjustment. He was unpredictable in his defense, always keeping you guessing, Hakeem said during one interview. It was exhausting every single possession. He didn't stop at squeezing Hakeem's space in the post. He used his trash talk and psychological tactics to throw the Dream off his game as well. The tension between Anthony and Hakeem reached its peak during a pivotal moment in 1994. The stakes couldn't have been higher. It was Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the Houston Rockets and the New York Knicks. During one sequence, Hakeem was backing Anthony down in the post, his signature, graceful movements poised to open up scoring opportunities. But as Hakeem spun, his elbow accidentally clipped Anthony's face. Anthony, furious and convinced it was intentional, fell hard onto the court, but didn't stay down for long. What happened next would become one of the most intense encounters of Hakeem's career. Anthony sprinted to his feet and immediately charged toward Hakeem, who, unfazed and true to his graceful reputation, turned and walked away to avoid escalating the situation. Anthony, however, saw red. He broke through a swarm of players trying to restrain him and bumped into Hakeem again, this time chest to chest. They sized each other up in a frozen moment that sent shockwaves through the arena. His anger was palpable, and the tension appeared ready to explode. Words were exchanged between the two, but Hakeem refused to engage further, keeping his composure while Anthony felt he was losing control of the moment. The referees stepped in before the confrontation boiled over, but Anthony's frustration didn't end there. A technical foul was called, but it wasn't on Hakeem. Instead, Houston was given a free throw and possession of the ball, while Anthony was relegated to the sidelines to sit and steam. For Hakeem, walking away from the fight wasn't just an act of maturity. It was a calculated move to prevent the Knicks from gaining an adrenaline boost, while also maintaining his focus on winning the game. And for Anthony, on the other hand, though, the sequence burned deeply. He genuinely believed Hakeem's elbow was meant to provoke him. In interviews years later, Anthony referred to the incident as one of the most frustrating moments of his career. The optics weren't favorable. It was the finals. Emotions were already running high, and his fiery outburst cost his team a potential momentum shift. Unlike other defenders who could simply be outmaneuvered, Anthony found ways to make life uncomfortable for even the league's most skilled big men. His strength, combined with his ability to guard multiple positions, meant Hakeem often found himself crowded and drained when Anthony was on the floor. He wasn't as skilled offensively, but he never needed to be. His skill as a defensive disruptor was enough to shift the outcome of games. And off the court, he wasn't much easier to handle. Away from the hardwood, Anthony's larger-than-life personality and natural magnetism made him a beloved figure among Knicks fans and a controversial figure among rival players. He became one of New York's most iconic enforcers, a player who embodied the city's toughness and grit. But for some reason, he had a tendency to carry that same fire off the court, and it showed up in some of his more contentious rivalries, including the one with Hakeem. Even years later, after Anthony retired, Hakeem continued to reflect on the rivalry with a mixture of frustration and respect. While Anthony never achieved the superstar status of other players Hakeem faced, his undeniable impact in those matchups left a lasting impression on the Dream. And as much as Hakeem hated those battles, he couldn't deny that Anthony made him dig deeper to bring out his best in every moment. That unrelenting push gave Anthony even more fuel to cement his legacy as one of the greatest of all time. Vernon Maxwell, the Needle. Known as Mad Max, he was a constant source of chaos that both fueled Hakeem and occasionally drove him to frustration. Their complicated dynamic wasn't just about basketball, it was about trust and the thin line between brilliance and madness that Maxwell embodied every time he stepped onto the court. Unlike other figures on this list, Vernon played alongside Hakeem during perhaps the most dominant stretch of his career. But his influence on Hakeem was one of friction and fire, sparking tension while simultaneously pushing the Dream to another level. Vernon was his own worst enemy, but sometimes ours too, Hakeem once said during an interview. You couldn't tell when it was going to be just basketball or something entirely different. The early years a fighter's journey before Vernon ever suited up for the Rockets, his basketball journey was defined by relentless energy, controversy, and raw talent. Drafted by the San Antonio Spurs in 1988, Maxwell quickly earned a reputation as one of the league's most fearless competitors. He wasn't the tallest or the fastest guard, but his confidence and undeniable grit made him stand out. And his trash talk was legendary, often crossing the line, and his wild behavior off the court was just as notorious. But despite the drama surrounding him, there was no denying his toughness. Maxwell thrived under pressure, delivering clutch performances that earned him respect, even if he didn't want to. Opponents hated guarding him, analysts struggled to categorize him, and teammates learned to accept the trade-off. Brilliance often came packaged with volatility. When Maxwell joined the Houston Rockets in 1990, the chemistry between him and Hakeem was far from immediate. His personality couldn't have been further from Hakeem's calm, respectful demeanor. Olajuwon, known for his humility and composure, was the polar opposite of Maxwell, the trash-talking, hot-headed guard who thrived on creating drama. But Maxwell brought something the Rockets desperately needed: heart and intensity. On the court, Mad Max was always in attack mode. Whether it was guarding the opposing team's best player or draining a clutch three-pointer, he was fearless. He gave Houston an edge, an emotional spark that complemented Hakeem's skillful dominance. During practices and games, Maxwell's intensity would often push Hakeem to work even harder, sharpening the team's focus. And the tension between these players erupted into full-blown conflict. During the Rockets' first title-winning season in 1994, emotions in the locker room ran high. Mad Max's fiery personality occasionally rubbed players the wrong way, but one particular incident went beyond the boiling point. As the story goes, Maxwell, frustrated by a lack of touches during a critical game, began yelling at teammates during halftime. His frustration with Hakeem, Houston's clear focal point, came to a head. Maxwell accused Hakeem of taking too many shots and failing to trust the supporting cast, despite the dream often carrying the Rockets through pivotal moments. Hakeem, typically reserved and slow to anger, didn't hold back this time. He stood up, challenging Maxwell directly, and the argument quickly escalated into a physical altercation. Locker room fights weren't unheard of in the league, but the clash between Houston's star player and its emotional spark plug shook the team to its core, and the incident wasn't exactly swept under the rug. Coaches and fellow teammates had to smooth tensions, reminding both players that the team's championship aspirations hinged on their ability to work together. Despite the fight, the Rockets rallied, feeding off their competitiveness and passion to ultimately claim the 1994 NBA title. Maxwell's contributions to Houston's success were undeniable. During their championship runs, his dogged defense and clutch shooting were vital to the Rockets' playoff dominance. He played especially well in high-pressure situations, most notably in the 1994 semifinals when he torched the Phoenix Suns with a game-winning three-pointer in Game 7. But for every moment of greatness, there were moments of tension. Maxwell's antics didn't stop after the locker room altercation. Whether it was in-game outbursts, off-court controversies, or his unpredictable play, Maxwell's erratic behavior kept Olajuwon and the Rockets constantly on edge. And despite the drama, Hakeem remained publicly supportive of Maxwell when speaking to the media. Vernon plays with so much passion. It's hard not to appreciate what he brings, even if it's not always easy, Hakeem said after the Sun series. While Hakeem sometimes struggled with Maxwell's volatility, the bond they formed through shared battles and championship triumphs carried the team forward. And his breaking point came in the playoffs. In the opening round against the Utah Jazz, Maxwell left the team, citing personal reasons. While the exact details remain unclear, rumors of dissatisfaction and tension within the locker room painted a picture of a player at war, not just with opponents, but with his own team. But his departure marked the end of an era. Houston rallied behind Olajuwon's leadership, ultimately securing a second consecutive NBA title, and for Mad Max, he wasn't there to celebrate with them. The dynamic between Hakeem and Maxwell was a roller coaster, but it epitomized the highs and lows of professional basketball. The clash of personalities, the drive to win, and the thin line between order and chaos. Together, they carved out one of the most successful eras in Rockets history, proving that even the most combustible partnerships can lead to greatness. Mitch Kupchak, the silent frustration. His approach was less about athleticism and more about positioning and throwing a wrench into Hakeem's rhythm. This wasn't about superstar one-on-one clashes. It was about quiet disruption, the kind that often goes unnoticed, but is impossible to ignore for the player on the receiving end. His NBA career had humble beginnings. Drafted in the first round by the Washington Bullets in 1976 after a standout collegiate career at North Carolina, Mitch was an intelligent player who relied on fundamentals and effort rather than natural gifts. Hakeem entered the league years later as a raw but uniquely talented big man from Nigeria, destined to become one of the league's most iconic players. From their first encounters, Mitch proved to be what Hakeem would later describe as a constant frustration, a player who didn't necessarily overpower you, but always found ways to make you work harder than you thought you needed. Mitch excelled at doing the little things that didn't show up on the stat sheet. Boxing out, subtly disrupting movement in the post, setting hard screens and forcing opposing big men to adjust their timing. Nowhere was this more apparent than when he matched up against Hakeem during his time with the Los Angeles Lakers. Despite being past his physical prime, Mitch used his basketball IQ to stay relevant, emerging as an irritating challenge for Hakeem in ways few others could. But perhaps the moment that cemented Mitch in Hakeem's memory was one of their most infamous encounters, a full-blown fight that escalated to chaos. It was during a heated matchup between the Houston Rockets and the Los Angeles Lakers. The play began innocently enough, with Hakeem moving toward the ball handler as if to set a screen. Mitch, defending Hakeem closely, placed both arms on him, ready to fight through a screen that never came. As Olajuwon swatted away his arms to create space, Mitch's irritation boiled over. In a split second, he bumped Hakeem backward, igniting a fire that no one, referees or teammates, could contain. And what followed was one of the NBA's more memorable scuffles. Both players began throwing punches, each landing fiery hits on the other. At one point, Mitch fell to the ground after taking a clean shot from Hakeem, and amidst the chaos, Olajuwon was pulled down as well. A Lakers teammate grabbed Hakeem around the neck, while a nearby referee essentially tackled him to keep the situation from spiraling, and unfortunately, it was already out of control. The fight had erupted right in front of the Lakers bench, and players began swarming around, making matters worse. Shoving and pushes flew within the crowd. Security personnel sprinted onto the scene as fans added fuel to the fire, throwing objects from the sidelines. The chaos was so overwhelming the cameras couldn't capture all of it. Both players were ejected from the game for their actions, but the aftermath of the incident lingered in the minds of fans and players. Mitch, visibly furious, screamed at officials while being escorted off the court, refusing to let the matter go. Hakeem, on the other hand, walked off in disappointment, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. Interviews after the game revealed no resolution, only lingering tension between the two players who had added another chapter to their rivalry. And reflecting on this moment years later, Hakeem admitted, Mitch wasn't a player who tried to dominate through skill or scoring, but he knew how to take you out of your comfort zone. I hated playing against him because nothing about it ever felt natural. But Mitch frustrated him in ways that superstars like Patrick Ewing or Shaq never could. Those battles were about proving skill. His matchups were a mental grind, forcing Hakeem to dig deep and adapt constantly. And what made him so unique in Hakeem's career was his ability to kill the flow. As Hakeem described it, Mitch wasn't trying to block shots or outscore him. He aimed to disrupt the rhythm that made me so dangerous. Whether it was subtle physicality or forcing him into awkward positions, Mitch had a way of making Hakeem uncomfortable in the post. These weren't highlight-worthy battles, but they forced Hakeem to question his decision-making, a remarkable feat for a player renowned for his poise and precision. And his career as a disruptor for opposing big men eventually transitioned into a successful front office stint, first with the Lakers and then later with the Charlotte Hornets. But for Hakeem, he represented a unique kind of rivalry, a player who didn't need stardom to push him to his limits. While many fans might overlook his contributions to the league, Hakeem's memories make it clear frustrating the dream was an achievement few could claim, and Mitch did it better than most. Hakeem's greatness wasn't just shaped by his incredible skill. It was tested in battle against warriors who pushed him to the limit. Whether they were enforcers or agitators, these players brought out the fire in the dream, forcing him to adapt, persevere, and ultimately cement his legacy. All right, that's all for today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.